All right, welcome everyone to another episode of No Power Panel. We're back after taking last week off. Hope everyone had a great week last week, and we're excited to be back with you all to talk about the latest political news. I'm Noam, one of your hosts.
And I'm Isaac, here with you again.
Yep, yet again. All right, how you doing? How's the week been treating you?
I'm good. I'm glad to be back. Seems like uh, you know there's not as much Canadian wise domestically outside the throne speech to talk about this week, and you know, but there's been a lot of action uh, stateside, which obviously always affects us. So yeah, excited to talk about it.
Sounds good. All right. So, I mean, you just addressed what we're going to be talking about first there, which is the throne speech, kind of the big Canadian political news of the week. The first one to be delivered by a monarch since 1977. Um, King Charles he was only in Ottawa for like less than 48 hours to deliver it.
Mhm.
It was a very quick in and out to do that kind of thing. Um,
But all the local Ottawa businesses and hotel he stayed at and visits he made will have pictures of him up forever now, based on this
it's
visit.
true. It's true, and I expect that the business has been good in Ottawa this week. If I had to
So, despite
say,
how insignificant it might have seemed, they will grasp onto what they can get for the royal visits.
as they always do. All right. What did you think of the throne speech, Isaac?
I didn't think it was uh, too. There wasn't too much new news out of it, other than the fact that the king was giving it. It seemed like just regurgitation of the liberal platform, and like priorities, kind of that we saw throughout the campaign, and then now through the first couple weeks of government of this new parliament. So nothing too exciting. I did notice some right wing like heads online talking about how like it's all a sham and the liberals are running like they've taken away the you know independence and stuff, and everything is being run through them, and all it has to be approved, and they're just regurgitating liberal talking points. It's like, yeah, that is kind of what a throne speech is. It's kind of what it's always been, except usually it's the governor general giving it, and I think people usually just associate the governor general with the government, maybe because that's essentially what they are, and what they always do is just give royal assent and so it's like people don't have that kind of idea of like supposed separation. But you know the idea of getting the king up there to give the throne speech, which is the government's talking points, like the history
The
behind
throne
that
speech.
is that it's to like show the power that is now in democracy, in the elected government's hands, and not in the power of the king. It's actually supposed to show that the king is kind of neutered, right? Like it's a it's a kind of symbol of the fact that like he is just delivering a speech given by the government. So it's not some like conspiracy that now that he's saying the government's talking points. It's like that's kind of the idea, right? So that
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, any of the right wing critics online who want to go back and look at any of the throne speeches delivered during Stephen Harper's time as prime minister, that's what they are. Just because this one happened to be delivered by the monarch and not by the monarch's representative, which is what the governor general is, let's not forget that it doesn't actually make a difference to that. I mean, the large part of the speech is actually written by the prime minister's office. It's not even written by the king.
Mhm.
From my understanding, this time in particular, there was a little bit up top that the king got to kind of put in himself that was a little bit more just greeting everyone and those kinds of things. But other than that, all of the policy items, when he talked about what has become, I think, the most discussed and memorable line of the speech, when he discussed Canada being the true North, strong and free, and that remaining the case essentially, and that kind of being the hint to Donald Trump, and that issue.
Mhm.
For me, I honestly thought that that was the most interesting part of the throne speech, was almost
Yeah,
what wasn't talked about.
yeah.
Right?
And there was lots of
I think that
illusions, right? Like it's like, oh,
mhm.
they're having evolving relationships with the rest of the world, and dynamics are changing, but things weren't like explicitly said, but it was like hinted at, of the importance of
No, it
like
was very
separating their.
implicit. The question that I have about this throne speech in particular, more so than ones not delivered by the monarch, are not so much what Mark Carney's office had to say about it and how much influence they had in it, because that's a standard thing that we know. But my interest actually is a little bit more in what did Keir Starmer's office have to say about it? What did Keir Starmer's office get to have their input in? Because the fact that it was delivered by King Charles, um, is significant in that anything that King Charles says, unlike the Governor General here in Canada, anything that King Charles says not only impacts Canada's relationship with the US and other international partners, but also has an inherent impact in the UK's in, relationship with the United States in particular and other international partners. Because it's not like he's able to stand up and be the king of Canada one day and not the king of the United Kingdom. He inherently is always both. Um, and so I wonder how whether Keir Starmer's staff got to look at the throne speech. I'm sure that they did. And I wonder whether they got to have any input, because I thought the fact that Donald Trump wasn't named specifically, that the American issue wasn't named specifically, when it was the central theme of the campaign that got us to this point, was telling, I think, in terms of that. And I think that maybe in the future, as we look back on this moment, what becomes a little bit more interesting, and the bigger story is
Yeah.
how was the UK Prime Minister able to impact the speech from the throne in Canada's parliament?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's ever on it. My honest take is I don't know if that's ever gonna, be be discussed or come out, or if that's ever like really
Absolutely.
like
And
come out.
ultimately, I think that Mark Carney and Keir Starmer have a good relationship. They come from a very similar place on the political spectrum. Their
Mhm,
ideologies are very like-minded. Um,
mhm.
and so I don't think that any of the policy was impacted.
Yeah,
More so the framing.
yeah, yeah. One thing I did want to point out was it was interesting to hear the king give a land acknowledgement, especially like I don't know how I don't follow the king's normal speeches, so I don't know if that's a common thing in the UK. Well, I know it's not because they're not really on unceded land, but so I don't know if when he's gone to other not in the UK, but when he's gone to other territories, if he gives land acknowledgements like that, like in New Zealand or in Australia, what have you. But to like hear him claim that it's like, oh, we're on unceded land, it just kind of shows the ridiculousness of it all. He's in the throne giving the speech on what he's going to do to that land, but they did mention relationships with indigenous people and groups, but I don't know. It was kind of a weird thing. It's like you're giving a land acknowledgement, but you really historically you're the call's coming from inside the house, buddy. So.
Yeah, very much so. A little rich to be deciding to do that, I think, given what the history there
And
is.
then I just want to touch on, in terms of actual specific policy planks, just quickly go through them, because like the things that I mentioned are the things they care about. They promised a lot of things during the campaign. They're saying they're going to prioritize a lot of stuff. The things they're actually mentioning in this speech is, that's those are their big ticket items. So like the ones that stood out to me is they're still talking about eliminating federal barriers to internal trade by Canada today. I think there's no political, that's going to be the easiest thing for them to do, because there's not really much political pushback on any side of the spectrum against that right now. So I think it's
the Conservatives have already said they're going to support that.
Exactly. Boosting housing by supporting prefabricated modular home construction. That's like kind of what they've been talking about previously. And then they kind of gave the nods to Trump, I guess, with the like increasing border security, and then limiting immigration and temporary foreign workers. And the wording was to rebalance the immigration system, but I guess it's essentially they haven't given specifics on what that actually means yet. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point to consider. I mean, well, I think it's interesting that through all of this, their policy agenda really has stuck to those key few things, to the point that they've put off doing a budget, because they know that these things are ones that they can get through the House very, very easily, get royal assent on, and get on with the other more probably slightly controversial items in their agenda, where they will face some pushback in Parliament. But I think that it's interesting that the strategy of the government at this point seems to be get ahead on the things that we can just very quickly do, rather than what other previous administrations have often done, which is to put some of the more controversial things out front. When you have that honeymoon, you have that public, you're able to push through a kind of first 100 days agenda of your key partisan goals. Certainly, so far at least, Carney seems to be sticking with his nation building promises and making things that they can reach some unanimity on at the centerfold of what they're pursuing in the legislative.
Especially given the context of, Carney still does enjoy high approval ratings. There's a couple polls this week that came out with him around plus 20 in terms of not, this is an approval, but like favorability. He's at about 20% above positive favorability versus negative, versus Poilievre, who's at like -5 or something. So there is like the opposition parties aren't in any rush, to force the Liberals' hand, but they'll jump on anything that can give them ammunition to start eroding that support. And I think, they still only have 168 seats. They don't have a majority, and they don't have any, agreement with any opposition party. So I think we know it's, for as far as the minority goes, it's probably going to be pretty stable for the next year. I don't think either of any of the opposition parties want to bring down the government anytime soon, but they want to chip away slowly at that support, so that within a year or two, when they are ready to run a campaign, maybe they're not as popular. They've tried to push on controversial issues, that didn't work and that didn't have that universal support from the nation. So I think that probably contributes to the current strategy.
I agree. I think going off of that, we're already seeing some bounce back in the NDP numbers at the national level. Not totally, certainly, but I've seen a couple of polls recently that have them in double digits again. So I think that there is that kind of willingness. And the other thing I'll mention on that is minority governments fall by accident. That does happen. It's happened in this country before. It happened to Joe Clark. Certainly, I don't think following the 2004 election, anyone thought that like 13, 14 months later, there was going to be a writ drop because of the confidence loss in the House. That I don't think was on the ballpark on then, but the sponsorship scandal blew up, and the opposition parties realized that they had the chance to score big, and so pulled the trigger. I agree. I think that probably for the next year or so, we're looking at a pretty stable situation, but I wouldn't put anything past the opposition parties at this point. I think that especially there's a lot of people who are talking about the NDP not being in a position to be able to do that. And I have a different take on that actually, which is they have nowhere to go but up. Right? I think that it's fair to say that they are at their lowest point that they could potentially reach. I don't see a scenario where they fall much below where they have right now. It could, but there always needs to be some left force in Canadian politics. Is kind of what I'm saying. Is there is the left flank in Canadian politics out there that does demand to be serviced, and so I think that there's an argument to be made that after the NDP has their leadership race, because certainly nothing's going to happen before that, but after they have their leadership race, I wouldn't be surprised if that NDP leader looked around and went, hey, even if I don't do phenomenally in the next campaign, but even if I can get us back to official party status, which probably is likely to happen just based on regular vote of a traditional Canadian election outside of the situation with the states that we found ourselves in this time. Some of those safe NDP seats that they lost are likely to go back to them in a normal election circumstance. And so if I'm that party leader, I'm looking around going, hey, you know what? We might not be able to run a super strong central campaign, but we can get the ball rolling and at least get back to a position where we can start actually building back in a sustainable way. So I wouldn't trust that the NDP is going to support this government for 4 years is all I'm saying.
No, definitely not. Definitely not 4 years, but I think at least a year.
We're agreed on that. Okay. I thought the other thing I want to briefly mention in terms of this domestic side of things right now is that watching Poilievre not have a seat in the House tickled my happy my happy places. I'm just listening to him talk about not having a seat, standing outside and not being able to go in, and having to be flanked by MPs in order to be allowed to speak there. Was certainly something that I appreciated, given how despicable I find him.
Yeah, it's a long fall from grace, and sometimes it's just enjoyable to see that embarrassment on his side from how confident he was at this time 6 months ago, even. So
yeah, no, exactly. All right, and then another group of people to speak in that same place this week were a group of Canadian medical officials who just returned from Gaza. and the stories that they told and the things that they described seeing uh, were truly heartbreaking. Um,
And just to hop in while you're
yeah, no, go ahead.
pulling some, like I think the main point that they were trying to say when they were speaking to the government is, you know, we can't we can only do so much. We can only send so much aid. We can only send so many doctors, but you can't doctor and aid yourself, you know, out of assault, you know, out of a ethnic cleansing. As they say here, yeah, you can read the exact quote, I guess.
Yeah. So this is Dr. Deirdre Noonan said, as a surgeon, I cannot treat a genocide. As doctors, we cannot stop a famine, so we demand that the Canadian government take meaningful action. And
And
she was joined. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, and the main things that they were asking for were like an arms embargo, like things that the Canadian government can very easily, and are probably like the lowest hanging fruit in terms of the minimum thing that they can do to help save lives, you know, is they have more power than any individual doctor. They can start putting that pressure. They can write all the statements they want, like that joint statement that they made,
Yeah.
um, with the other national leaders, but it's like you actually have to take concrete action to punish Israel for its crimes. You know, you have
Yeah.
to withhold actual, you know, support for the state, you know. So
I think Israel has proven at this point that they are not listening to statements. They are not listening to. This is what Joe Biden tried to do for a year and a half, and it failed. Um, it's not the way to end this genocide. And as an international community, they do have the ability. There is the ability to end this. We've seen it happen before. We saw it happen with South Africa apartheid. We've seen it happen with Israel when in 1982, 81, 82, Ronald Reagan saw what was happening and what Israel was doing and picked up the phone and called the Israeli government, and the bombing stopped 5 minutes later. That there is this kind of international power that does exist in Western uh, countries and in the UN and in these kinds of ways if you are actually prepared to take action beyond issuing statements.
mhm.
And
And saying you're gonna have quote unquote targeted sanctions isn't like that's not strong enough. You know, you need like to end the bilateral trade agreements like that exist between
yeah,
these countries and Israel. Like you, UK, and France all together have, you might not be as strong as the US in terms of how much you support with arms or such, but you still supply Israel with arms. You still have a lot of trade that goes between these economies and Israel. You can still have a great effect on hurting them, um, economically, in exchange for, you know, your demands. Like you have some leverage. You're not the United States, but you have some leverage.
absolutely, 100%. And the fear that exists in our country and in the other countries of uh, incurring the somehow wrath of Israel and the anger of Netanyahu and the anger of maybe their local Jewish communities should not come uh, should not come before the deliberate starvation of millions of people. There is a greater moral standard here, and there is also a greater legal standard. Canada, the UK, and France, not to mention, I think every EU country, Australia, New Zealand, so many countries are signatories of the Rome Statute, which compels action when genocide is occurring, which compels action when crimes against humanity are. And so I'm getting very tired of these double state speak and this kind of thing. It's honestly, in some ways, because relatively liberal parties are in control, in particular in Canada, in France, in the UK, in Australia. And so there is that instinct to say some things about in the right language and stuff, and recognizing humanity and doing what has been done in terms of those things. But I'm getting quite tired of the support not actually stopping around that, and the willingness for people like Anthony Housefather, who is completely genocidal in his language, and is still allowed to be a member of the Liberal Party of Canada, is still allowed to speak on their behalf and work on their behalf. There are standards that should be met in a society around following laws, and we have legal obligations that we're failing, to the point that now, if you actually want to get technical about it, Mark Carney is in violation of international law by not doing his duty under the Rome Statute. Keir Starmer is in violation of international law, right? Like, these things should matter. These things were created after the Holocaust to prevent something like that from happening again. And here we are, 70 some odd years after, and nothing has changed. 80 years after, nothing has changed. We're in the same place again. And it's really quite chilling.
Yeah. And I think at this point we just keep I feel like saying the same things over and over again. It's like been Groundhog Day for the past, year and a half, in terms of trying to get the Canadian government to take action on this file, even just as little things like getting Canada to recognize Palestine as a state. Like, you can't move towards the future, even the future you're claiming you want. Like, we can argue all day about what a potential future we want to see. Some people may argue they want a two-state solution. Okay, I'm not gonna get in on this call in terms of what future I want to see, but it's like a lot. That's like the going line within the Liberal Party usually, right? It's like a free Israel and a free Palestine, both, coexisting. We can talk about if that's rational or whatever, but in order to do that, you have to acknowledge Palestine as a state first, which they don't even do yet. So it's like you're not even taking the small steps to get to this future you say you want, let alone the steps to actually have justice for a people that have been so oppressed. But we only have so much time to discuss this on this call, but I just wanted to get that point in before the end of the segment.
Absolutely. I think the last thing to be said in this segment, specifically because it was doctors who Canadian doctors who were there and who were speaking about it, that I just want to say is that medical staff should never be a target of war. Medical and humanitarian staff should never be a target, no matter the circumstances, whether this was a justified war or not. Medical staff should not be targeted. The family of medical staff should not be targeted. And we are seeing that going on right now. And that is one of the most horrific things out of this. in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that that's something that we'll talk about more, as we have already talked about it on past episodes, because unfortunately it seems to be continuing. All right, let's turn stateside. So this was an interesting week in American politics. Elon Musk appears to be out after what's being called quite a breakup with Donald Trump. I mean, I think we all saw this coming. We all knew that
Mm-hmm.
his time was going to be limited. But I don't think anyone quite expected the how it kind of became a little bit of a big deal because it was expected. I think everyone was just kind of expecting it to be, okay, he's gone. Well, we're moving on. But of course,
Yeah.
Donald Trump wasn't able to let that happen. We've had, definitely leaks targeted at each other going back and forth this week. Um, it's been messy, it's been dirty, it's been Republican on Republican violence, and I've loved every minute
Yeah.
of it.
And like, yeah, keep going.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, Musk did an interview this week where he criticized the quote unquote big, beautiful bill, the fact that Doge can only cut spending so much, and it's all undone when, you raise the national debt in this bill by X amount. Like, but if we actually get into the nitty gritty of what is in the bill, it's like, okay, it's giant tax cuts for the richest. It's no tax cuts for the poor. It's so, and that is what is offsetting all the revenue source. So, and then to offset the huge tax cuts for the rich, it's cutting Medicaid, it's cutting SNAP and food assistance programs. It's like huge austerity measures on social programs and the money is not even like a drop in the bucket with how much to make up for the revenue they're losing by giving the huge tax cuts on the rich. And Musk is coming out and saying, well, we are trying to, like, Musk's whole like kind of MO, like with the government and like how this like whole kind of like his people like see government, it's like government inefficiency, like we can cut to make up savings to fix the debt. It's like, okay, none of that means jack if you just stop collecting taxes from like the wealthiest Americans essentially and
Yeah.
say you don't have to give us any money. It's like, okay, well, you have to have some government service at any level to have it be a functioning government. And if you just are saying, well, we don't want any taxes, then it kind of gets rid of all of that. That what Musk sees as like the work he's done to balance, the budget, which he hasn't really done anything. Like Doge hasn't really
No, he's
found any efficiencies. That's the real.
that's exactly why, and that's why they've had to cut these services the way that they have in the big beautiful bill, because it's the only way that they have been able to make it even look like these tax cuts are at any level worth it and affordable. But yeah, I mean, certainly this is a criticism that a lot of Republicans are having. It did pass the House, the bill, but that was before Elon's criticism, before Elon left, before it was clear that power center was in opposition. And I think that there are a lot of senators right now who have made it very clear that this bill isn't passing the Senate as it is. Now, they haven't said that they're not going to vote for it. What they've said is that there significant changes are going to be needed. And that is a part of the process in how the American government works, where the Senate can pass their own version, and then the House and the Senate get together in a joint committee and have to kind of work out the differences between the two versions of the bill. And what will be interesting and what will be telling and what will ultimately decide what ends up happening is who gets put into that process by both the House and the Senate. Who's going to be on that part of the gambit where they'll have to align the House version and the Senate version, and what are those people's pet projects going to be, because those are the ones where the Senate's version, where there will be more funding, will be reconciled, and the House version, I think ultimately, like, the tax cuts that we see in the House version are likely to be in the final bill. What's likely not to be in the final bill is a lot of the spending cuts that the Senate just isn't going to pass, and that is Elon Musk's issue, right? I think that if Elon Musk could be guaranteed that all of these spending cuts were going to be in the final version that gets Trump's signature, he probably would look at the bill as a net positive. It's that it's going to explode the deficit and the debt, because they're going to pass these tax cuts without a huge amount of these spending cuts, and it's just going to make everything so much worse.
Well, if we want to relate it to, something more local, it's like these conservative governments, that's like what they've been doing for the past few decades, like it used to be conservatives would cut taxes and cut supports and cut spending, but now it seems that the conservatives are like, oh, we can have our cake and eat it too. We can complain about the deficits till we're blue in the face while Democrats are in power in Canada, while Liberals or NDP governments are in power. But as soon as we're in power, we're going to just completely ignore them. We're going to cut revenue sources and then not cut spending. And it will just blow up the deficit, and it doesn't matter when we're in power, because we're not going to be talking about it, and we're going to control the narrative, and then we'll just talk about it when the other parties are in power and act like we cared at all. And that's been a good strategy for them, because they don't get any of the negatives of actually making the cuts. Not to say in America they aren't, because right now they are, but they're doing much less and much less overtly, than they have in the past, because they realize they can have their cake and eat it too,
Absolutely. And speaking in terms of controlling the narrative and how that is a part of that process, I mean, even just the way that we are on this call referring to this as the big beautiful bill, right? Like, the Republicans are so much better at branding these things than the Democrats are, and you can say that that's not relevant to how successful or whatever the actual policies are. But at the end of the day, like, that's why the Republicans are winning. That's why they're able to pass these things. The big, beautiful bill may sound slightly weird and slightly, we say it in a mocking way, but it's Trump understands marketing better than maybe any other political force on this planet. And he's proven that time and time again. And I think that needs to not be underestimated as to their success. I think that the Democrats need to get a lot better at how they are speaking about these issues, because I think a lot of the issue comes from that in particular. Speaking of American politics and of Democrats not really being on point, have you been following at all what's going on with Jake Tapper's new book?
You can explain it to me more in depth. So
okay,
I'll let you take
more
the
in
reins
depth.
on this
Sounds good. So Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, who's a White House correspondent for Axios, have put out a book together called Original Sin. And it's all about the cover-up of Joe Biden's medical decline. obviously, the news of Joe Biden recently has been sad, and we wish him well. And certainly we're thinking of him in that context. But in terms of his medical issues, what has essentially been revealed was that his decline actually started in 2015. There are staffers who talk about there being two Bidens all the way back to 2015, and one of them is fully capable and good and slightly slower than he has been in the past, but very typical of a man in their 80s. And the other Biden is who we saw in the debate. Is not functional, is not really aware of what's going on, of what he's saying, of when things have happened. I mean, if you've read the testimony that he gave to Robert Hur during that investigation, he doesn't remember when Beau Biden died in that moment. And that's not something that Robert Hur brought up. Robert Hur has taken a lot of heat because Biden at the time blamed him for bringing up Beau Biden. That was not a part of Robert Hur's line of questioning. It was that Biden brought it up in the context of the dates of when he had the classified material. And he at first says, well, Beau was deployed at that point. Beau Biden was deployed in the aughts. And then he talks about it being when Beau died. Beau Biden died in 2015. This was about a time after Joe Biden had left office as vice president. So there's a lot of these things that have come out and come up. And in particular in this book, there are quotes from Democrats who are saying things like, we were seeing all of this behind the scenes, and at the same time being told by the family and by senior staff that this wasn't happening and it wasn't as bad as it was looking. At the George Clooney fundraiser that George Clooney wrote the op-ed about, that kind of really got the ball rolling in terms of forcing Biden to drop out. It's revealed that Joe Biden didn't recognize George Clooney. George Clooney wasn't doing a particular role at the time. He looked like George Clooney, who Joe Biden has known for at least 15 years, has been close to at various points, is one of the most recognizable people on the planet just in general. And Joe Biden was introduced, his staffer said, "Oh, it's George," and Joe Biden shook his hand and introduced himself to him, and didn't realize that it was George Clooney that he was speaking with, and George Clooney himself had to kind of say, "Hey, Joe, it's me, it's George Clooney," and that kind of shook Biden in the moment enough to go, "Oh yeah, right, yeah." And so it's a lot of these stories that have come out. There's a Democratic senator who, after the debate, reached out to the White House, was told Biden's fine, he's capable, he's up for this. And then after Biden made the decision to drop out, this Democratic senator went and had a private meeting with Joe and Jill, and it was just the three of them. And said in his interview about it with Jake Tapper for this book, he wasn't fucking fine. Joe Biden was finishing his sentences. Joe Biden was guiding him through the conversation. This was not a healthy man. And so I think that this is what's come out in this book. That has been really interesting, has been really revealing of the Democratic Party's fundamental issue, which is they can criticize Republicans all they want for follow the leader mentality. But when you didn't have Democrats who were seeing this stuff behind the scenes dating all the way back to 2015, not saying it publicly, that's a big problem.
Yeah, and
that's a big problem.
And I think that's the issue, right? It's like if the Democrats actually believed any of the narratives or talking points they say about Donald Trump in terms of he will be the death of democracy, you know, which I do agree with actually. And they would have wanted to win, put country above party, find the best possible leader to defeat him, not run Joe Biden for a second term, like they said when they all lined up behind him after the first term. Say they want to have generational change, have a leader who could have had a full, primary to garner support, get people on their side, get a base of donors, build a movement. Like they said, they wanted all these things to have the best chance of being Donald Trump. Did they do any of those things? No. You know, the Biden's inner circle and the Democrats who could make those decisions decided they cared. I don't know what they cared about because it doesn't seem like there's any logic. Like it doesn't protect your job if you're running this guy who can't win. Maybe
They cared about Joe Biden's feelings.
You know what I mean? Like it's just like it was idiocy. It's like, well, if you actually wanted power, you would not be making these decisions. It seems so.
No, exactly. I mean, one of the lines that really stuck out to me was when they said, well, let's do, every president gets to run for a second term. And that was the justification. Even in 2023, which is when it sounds like the decline became really significant and really noticeable, that was the mentality, was presidents get to run for a second term, and he says he wants to do it. No
actual logic or strategy.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think that the Democratic lineup behind Joe Biden gets off accountability-wise in this, because they are they all could have made Joe Biden drop out earlier if one or two of them with significant names had challenged him. And the fact that they didn't is largely why what happened.
And I honestly think if Trump loses, if you have someone who's less connected to the Biden administration, who's a strong candidate, they could have easily beaten him, Trump loses. If Biden actually drops out and they have a primary and it's not Kamala Harris, I'm not going to get into Kamala Harris's like abilities as a politician or whatnot, but the crux of, we just saw it, to tie it back to Canada, Chrystia Freeland got crushed in the Liberal leadership race, partially because Liberal Party members thought she could be too tied to Trudeau. She has too much Trudeau stink on her. Like she's been too much of a figurehead for the Trudeau government, that she's too closely associated. We have to reset. And if the Democrats had done something like this, I think they beat Donald Trump. Even if it's someone who might have been in his administration but wasn't necessarily the vice president. I would have ideally liked it to be someone as more of an outsider, but like I do think they would have had a much better shot, and it would not have been as close as it was. And I don't think Trump probably wins.
Absolutely. I think that an open primary process in 2024 for the Democrats leads to Gretchen Whitmer as the nominee. Is probably the most likely scenario. And I think that she probably cleans Trump's clock in the general. That's my personal opinion. We don't know if someone else would have emerged. But I think that the likeliest scenario, she was at her height of popularity during that race. So I think that the likelihood is that she would have won and done very well against Trump. All right, Isaac, it's time. We skipped it last week for our NDP leadership draft, which, by the way, Heather McPherson went on the record this week and made it very clear that she is running, even if she didn't say it. And so it looks like you've got at least one in the race on that. We'll keep updating as that race spells out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's looking
But
pretty good.
yeah, it's time for winners and losers. So
Do you want to go first since I've been taking your winners and losers recently? You can start it this week.
you up it. I can start it, sure. Um, so my loser for the week is Joe Biden. Specifically because of this book, and what's come out as a result. I think that his cancer diagnosis aside, it's been a very bad week for him. It's been very damaging to his political legacy. It's been very damaging to the legacy of both Jill Biden and Hunter Biden, who both look like two of the top culprits in this cover up. And the Biden family, maybe it should be the Biden family instead of just Joe Biden, because this has been a very, very bad week for them. And I think that history will remember this as the week that we found out a lot of stuff that we needed to know, and that it was important that it happened, and that Joe Biden really failed in his central mission as president. And that's sad, and that's, is what it is, but it makes him my loser for the week.
Okay,
Who's your
makes
loser for the
sense.
week?
My loser for the week is Elon Musk, because you can be the richest man in the world. He rose to fame and prominence and, a brand of supporting, the environment, electric cars. He had a lot of people in like San Francisco, Silicon Valley support that type of faction, right? Like kind of like, and
Yeah.
then he burned it completely on this like Twitter to X free speech tirade, let all the Nazis in and be a hotbed for right wing populism. Then I'm gonna get in bed with Trump. Now that he's out of bed with Trump, and Trump's gonna spend weeks and months tarnishing his brand for now that segment of the population, the Nazi segment, I'll say. Then now who's he gonna have? The left is already you can be the richest man in the world, but it's like if you have like pissed off 55% of the population, and now you're get to have a campaign ran against you by the other 45%. I think his brand and his businesses will suffer having an assault from both sides. I don't think he can find a safe haven, so we'll see how that turns out. You can do a lot with a lot of money, so maybe he'll be able to come out relatively unscathed. But I think when you're that rich and your brands and your businesses rely so much on you and the cult of personality around you, I think it's going to hurt a lot when now he loses the safe haven he had found himself on for the past couple of years. So we'll see what happens.
Sounds good. I think that's a good loser. All right, let's go to our winners. My winner for the week is Nahid Nenshi.
Okay.
First of all, his by-election was called after 6 months of waiting, and I think that that's a good thing. In addition, I think that the discussion that is being had around Alberta separatism right now, which we will certainly talk about at another point as a referendum gets closer and closer in the next year. But Nahid Nenshi, I think, has a huge opportunity in front of him to become a really central voice in Canada and in Alberta. The NDP in a poll recently in Alberta is ahead of the Conservatives by multiple points for the first time since Nenshi's leadership started. And we really, I think, are in a situation where a referendum campaign in the lead up to the next Alberta provincial election really fundamentally advantages him. It gives him the opportunity to be kind of the central voice on the pro-Canada side, whether that's yes or no, depending on the question. And he can be that because Danielle Smith naturally is going to have to cater to both sides of her coalition. And so she's going to have to, maybe she'll campaign on one side, but she's going to have to say things that are nice to both. And then she is going to be able to go scorched earth against the separatists, who are a minority in Alberta. So I think that puts him in a really, really good position heading into the next provincial election. So, Nahi Nenshi, kind of out of nowhere maybe, but that's my pick for the winner of the week. Who's yours?
My pick for the winner of the week is Bruce Vanjoy. He was given. He's just.
I considered him.
That name might not be familiar to everyone. He is who defeated Pierre Poilievre in Carleton. He was given the first member statement in the legislature to a standing ovation from everyone. I think when you win a riding,
the final.
In that. Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. When you win a riding when you win a riding in that flashy of a fashion, it puts you on the map. He's now on the map. He's given that kind of prime hit, in terms of the Liberals want to elevate his voice, put him on that pedestal that he deserves. He put in a lot of work to defeat Poilievre. So I think he can take this, name recognition and this notoriety for this win, and the world's his oyster right now in Canadian politics. And if he plays his cards right, he could be around a while and maybe get some high profile positions in the future. And just based on the fact that, he took down Poilievre. That's my win.
Absolutely.
And I think this placement of his member statement signals that he's going to be given that platform to be kind of a figurehead in the party. He's not ready to be in cabinet or anything yet, but at least, be representing the Liberals on a national stage, go on, do media appearances and things of that sort. So,
absolutely. I think that's a good pick. I would be interested to see what committees he ends up on, because it won't be back end committees that nobody wants. I suspect that he'll get kind of prime pick of his committee placements. All right. Well, that's our winners and losers, and that's another episode of No Power Panel. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next week. Thanks for indulging our off week last week. We plan to, in the future, when one of us has to be unavailable, we'll have some maybe some fun things stockpiled for those times to put out as a little bit of a break from our usual stuff. And I actually haven't told you this, Isaac, yet, but we're quite close to getting our first interview. I've been going back and forth with someone. So more on that later. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you.